Brilliant, not forgotten that. Hi everybody, and welcome to the very first author event of my lovely little book club, Books from the Margin. Thank you so much for coming here tonight. It is such a lovely thing to have you all here and to have such a good turnout as well. Books from the Margin is my sort of baby project, and it is completely different to what I usually do, and I'm a bit nervous about it, so excuse me if I babble a little bit. Little bit of housekeeping first. If you need to unmute yourself for any reason, I can't see that you would, but your mute button and your stop video buttons are at the bottom of the screen in the bottom left-hand corner. If you need to turn your camera off, that's completely acceptable. You can do whatever you like. Zoom is a very in-your-face sort of medium, isn't it? So do feel free to sit and, you know, with your camera off and not do anything. That's absolutely fine. If you get knocked offline and you lose your signal, use the same link to get back in. And I will do the same if I get knocked offline. So we'll meet back here in this room if we can't connect to the internet. I think that's all there is to say. Apart from there's not going to be a break. It's only 45 minutes. So if you need to go out and do something or take a phone call or anything, make sure you're muted and just do it. You know, you don't have to put your hand up. We have a chat. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a little voice thingy, and it says chat on it. If you want to ask a question while Liz is reading or while I'm talking to Liz, do please put them into the chat and I'll see if I can get round to them. It would be lovely to have some more questions. I've got some questions to ask Liz as well. There we are, there's Mag. In she comes. And hopefully things will just run. Oh, she's found it. The problem with Eventbrite, it's absolutely fantastic, but people think they can access the event through Eventbrite, even though I send the link out, so it gets a bit confusing. So just please bear in mind that there is only me here. I'm just a freelance individual and I don't have any tech support. It's just me flailing about in front of you. So if I do go silent and furrow my brow a little bit, it's because I'm reading an email. Okay. That's all that out of the way. Let's get started. I'm going to introduce our fantastic author for the evening now. Liz Berry was born in the Black Country and now lives in Birmingham. Her debut collection, Black Country, quoted in The Guardian as a sooty, soaring hymn to her native West Midlands, won a Somerset Maugham Award, the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize, and the Forward Prize for Best First Collection, which is extraordinary and well-deserved. Her pamphlet, The Republic of Motherhood, was a Poetry Book Society pamphlet choice, and the title poem won the Forward Prize for Best Single Poem in 2018. Her latest book, which we have been reading with the book club, is The Home Child, a novel in verse. She reimagines the story of her great-aunt Eliza Showell, one of the many children forcibly emigrated to Canada as part of the British child migrant schemes. We are exceptionally lucky to have Liz with us tonight. She's a poet who I have long admired for her generosity of spirit, as much for her gentle, thought-provoking, honest poems, which to me always seem to circle back to what belonging means and what love is. I recently read The Home Child and found it just utterly beautiful, elegant, heartbreaking, and full of poems that I have returned to. At the book club meeting, because we had a book club book chat on Sunday morning a couple of weeks ago where we chatted, chatted about the book, and everyone was so enthusiastic about it. Everyone just absolutely loved it. And one of the things that was brought up at the book club was the way that Liz Berry's poems often make the reader feel animalistic, like they are animals. And I feel this very much with these poems. It's a real skill to have a poem that almost feels like it's alive. The poems seem to be alive and mesmerizing. This collection, this novel in verse, is no different, and it is beautifully produced too. That was the other thing that came up in the book club, was how beautiful it is. And I think with hardbacks especially, it's very unusual to have a hardback poetry book as well. Because you tend to pay a little bit more for hardbacks, it's really nice to have something so aesthetically pleasing and so tactile, and the colours, I don't know if you can see that, this red on the inside cover, just absolutely gorgeous. I'm going to stop waffling now. I'm going to hand over to Liz. So Liz, thank you for joining us. To start with, can you tell us in your own words about the home child and what the story means to you and how you came to it?
Oh, thanks, Wendy. That's such a nice introduction. And thanks, everybody, for coming along on a Friday to chat with me and for reading the book. So, Wendy's already given a beautiful introduction, but I'll talk a bit about the book first. So, The Home Child is a novel in verse, which I think is sort of like a elegant way for me of saying that's a story told through poems. And as Wendy said, it reimagines the life of my great aunt Eliza Shell, who in 1908 was one of the many children from children's homes emigrated out to the colonies to work in indentured service. I first discovered Eliza's story when I was going out to Canada on my own literary pilgrimage to visit Green Gables, the home of Anne of Green Gables. So Anne was my absolute childhood heroine, and I'd finally convinced my partner of many years to come on a pilgrimage to Green Gables with me in Nova Scotia. And at the same time, my mum was looking into her family tree and the lives of her grandparents. And we discovered, I suppose, the truth about Eliza's story. But as the two things happened at the same time, I was able to trace Eliza's journey out from the Black Country all the way over to Nova Scotia, right out to the tiny little town in Cape Breton where she lived and where she was buried. And it was such a moving experience. And I was so sort of affected and haunted by the story that I knew I wanted to write about it. And I didn't know how I'd write about it, whether it be a couple of poems or one poem. But I found that once I did start writing the poems and the story, like I couldn't stop, it just kept growing. And in that sense, it felt like it wanted to be a book that told a story rather than just a little handful of poems that captured scenes.
Thank you so much. I can just hear how much love there is in this story when you talk about it. There's so much love in it. And I love this idea of a pilgrimage to Nova Scotia for the Green Gables. I have a question from Gull, who is here, I think, tonight. And she says, when and how did you decide to become a poet? Was it something you always did, or did you have other jobs too?
Oh,
Do you
that's such
still
a
have
nice
other jobs?
question. Thank you, Go. Yeah, so I did. I always wanted to be a writer or to be a poet, specifically. From when I was really little, I've always loved poems and reading them and writing them. But obviously that just, even though I loved reading and writing, that didn't feel like a possible job to have. So I actually trained as a primary school teacher, and I spent quite a few years teaching nursery and reception. And I wasn't really writing in that time, but I went back and did an adult education night class at the local university. It was called Poetry for Beginners. And I had a lovely tutor who was really encouraging. And so then I went back to university and did a master's part-time whilst I was still teaching. And then I did the two things side by side until I had my little boys and left teaching. But yeah, I've always had other jobs alongside poetry. But even now, because most of my job is writing poems or reading poems or teaching people about poems, I do all the time think to myself, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is my actual job. Like, I can't believe like this dream is a job that is sort of a constant thrill for me still.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about poetry as feeling like it couldn't be a real job. And I experienced something similar. I think because I'm from a working class background, had a very similar feel to it when I wanted to go and work in the arts. And I ended up not doing that for a long, long time. But it's such an inspirational story as well for you to have done this and taken this up and got this far and doing so well and being so well known and writing poetry that touches people so much as well. I just think it's just wonderful. I knew I was going to do that. Do you know what? I use the word wonderful repeatedly and I use it all the time. So I overuse it. So apologies if I just keep saying wonderful. But it really is wonderful. And it's wonderful to have you. Shut up, Wendy. I'm going to invite you now, Liz, to read some poems for us. I'm going to shut up now and let you read some of your poems to us. Thank you so much.
I'd love to read. But please don't worry, because I repeatedly use the words beautiful and lovely. And once I was so delighted because I was asked to go on Radio 4 to speak about Birmingham. And I did, and afterwards I thought, oh, well done. That was quite a serious show, and I held my own. And a man emailed me to say, yes, I very much enjoyed your performance, but you do say beautiful rather a lot. Which I suppose is better than like effing and jeffing a lot or something, isn't it? Okay. So I'll read a few poems from the beginning bit of the book, and then we'll have a chat. And the first poem I'll read comes from really early on in the book, and it's a poem just called Eliza. And it's when we meet Eliza still at home in the Black Country, in sort of this little golden summer before her mom dies. And we meet her in this sort of beautiful scrubby landscape, half industrial, half wild, down by the canal, the cut. And I really wanted this to be a poem of celebration of her in the creaturely order of things. Eliza. Queen of all wet the beds and dander, common nettles and dock, sticklebacks, angleshades, sparrows, lice, moles hung from nails like velvet gloves. In the leather beyond the cut, see her? Queen of dung beetles and dog violets, a crown on her head of all the town's daisies, rime on their petal tips. Eliza, pursing her lips to a grass blade, calling up its music. Come on, come up. The world is too alive to be down in the dark. Too afire, too fledgy. Eliza's hair, dirty sorrel in sunlight, lights the long grass ablaze. Little queen of fiery holes, with her back-to-back court, all its slum and love, its cram like a burrow. Eliza, queen of all lowly creeping souls, all toilers and darklings, all shunned things lay their blessings at her wet and holy stockinged feet. Long live the queen. Happiness is a wind that whistles straight through. And then I'll move us forward a little bit. So in that early winter of the book, Eliza's mum dies and her brothers are forced to give her up. They're sort of not able to look after her. And so they give her up to the Middlemore emigration homes. At the time, child emigration was a really big thing. I was going to say big business, and in lots of ways it was. Many organisations were doing it, religious organisations, childcare organisations, philanthropists, huge numbers of children being transported out. And Eliza's sent to the Middlemore homes. And here, I'll read a poem called In the Dormitory at Night. And we get to meet some of the girls that are in the children's home with her before they're sent to Canada. In the dormitory at night, a garden of girls is blooming. The hum of their hearts like bees in swarm, thrumming, thrumming. Their dreams overgrown and blown to seed. Sorrow's blackbird high in the wych elm sings. Lily, camellia, ivy, rose, all flowers of the field. Wrong soil, worst season. That winter chiller that never was known, the slums bone dead. Here's Iris, scrawny as a seedling, skin gold in the creeping dawnlight. Daisy, the drunk's girl, bruised, thin, hair shorn to a fuzzed halo. Olive, with a made-up blasphemous prayer that cools the air like rain. How their tendrils unfurl from their narrow beds, reach out through the darkness. Bloom where you are planted, the sampler tells them. But oh, their voices, flowers torn from their black roots and laid on a grave. And I'll just read one more before we have another chat. So in this poem, Sailing Day, we see the girls as they're boarding the ship in Liverpool. It was a really long journey. It took them, gosh, nearly two weeks to get there. They travelled sort of through rough seas and icebergs and all sorts. So here they are just boarding the ship, and you get to hear some of their little names. Sailing Day, Liverpool. The gulls are crying like little wenches. Goodbye, goodbye, good luck, goodbye. Raw and squally, the wind mithers as we climb the steps. Birdie legs are shivering in our itchy new stockings. Nellie, Margaret, Kathleen, Dora, Higgins, Shell, Elwell, Proctor. Age 4, 9, 6, 11. White hankies whipped from our waving ons, quick as birds, flying up. We're off. Only Dora Pike blarting. Agnes, Eliza, Peg, Hilda, Bib, Gell, Hodgetts, Munden. Age 3, 5, 12, 7. The rest of us ghosty faced, so quiet you can hear our bellies drum because the waves rock the ship. Goodbye, goodbye, good luck, goodbye. Watching Liverpool shrink to a doll's town in the fog, already wiping out the sight of us. Doris, Rose, Ida, Clara, Dakin, Tompkins, Pike, Bunda, was herded like cows down endless wet steps, squeezing the under the wench in front. Goodbye, goodbye, good riddance, goodbye. And so I'll leave them there. We'll have a chat, and then when I read again, we'll see what happens to Eliza out in Canada.
Oh, that was just absolutely gorgeous. Something really magical happens when you see a poet reading their work and finding their way through the work that they know so well, and finding those pauses and sitting in those stanza breaks and those pauses. And it's really magical, especially to hear you read, because you just read so beautifully. It is just, it's wonderful. Saying it again. Oh, well, this is a good question to follow that, actually. You are part of a shared reading group with the organisation The Reader. I've seen this on Twitter. I've seen you talk a little bit about this on Twitter. Why do you think the physical act of reading and sharing stories is so important to people?
Well, I think there's something really intimate and sort of primal and profound about sharing stories, Wendy, because if you think about it, listening to people read or speak a story or a poem aloud, that predates books, it predates print, and it goes back to some of our earliest memories. So when you read in a group with people, especially when you're reading really slow, or you're spending a lot of time talking about something, you're not trying to critically analyse it or find the answers, you're just perhaps talking about what you enjoy about it, how it relates to life or moves you. I think it takes people right back to a really early time in their lives as well, of being read to by somebody, or that dreamy space of listening. It's almost like a time before print existed for you. And when you read with a group like that, or you read to a group and chat with them, it always makes me sort of feel, I feel this is how poets and authors would love to be read. You know, just with sort of this real sort of open-heartedness. Because so much comes out. You know, it's like when you're teaching a poem to a group and you're talking about the poem, you might have spoken about that poem and read it a million times with a million different groups, but each time you find out something new about it, don't you? Because people sort of meet you halfway with it, and you hear about their stories and their lives and their dreams and their feelings. So I just think it opens up something really profound for people.
Absolutely, absolutely, and beautifully explained as well. This idea, I think it was I think it was Margaret Atwood. I read one of her books, and she said to be a storyteller, you have to have like a proto storyteller. Someone has to tell stories to you so that you can build that skill within you. And I think that's so true. And I think that's what happens as well when you attend readings, and when you, like you say, when you go through a poem with other people, and how you deconstruct it and how other people reconstruct it is such a special and magical thing. I see in the chat we've got a question from Nick, who says, just wondering if there were poems that didn't make it into the book, and how did Liz come up with the order of the poems? That's an interesting question.
Oh, so the first bit of that is really easy. Yeah, there were loads of poems that didn't make it in. Absolutely loads. Like, I overwrote by a massive amount. I think because I'd never written a narrative before, I was really worried that people wouldn't understand things. So I almost like wrote too much. And then just with the help of other people and my editor, then it was just a case of pulling back and working out what you don't need. And I think the way poems work, you can leave a lot more out than you imagine you can when you're writing a narrative. So there were lots. And something that really inspired me when I was writing, I listened to Ilya Kaminsky give a beautiful talk about writing Deaf Republic. And he said it took him so long, and he produced 50 boxes of material that went into it. And the interviewer said, like, 50 boxes, do you think that's like, he's had a bit too much? And he went, it takes 50 boxes to make a world. And I thought, that's just a perfect answer. It just took 50 boxes, and then out of that came this perfect little book. So yes, I massively overwrote, and the order was, I think I had quite a good sense of the flow of the story and the order, but my editor is really brilliant. She's a fiction editor as well, and she's really brilliant at ordering. So she shuffled things around, especially like in the middle bit where they're out in Canada and where Eliza and Daniel are sort of meeting and falling in love. She did a lot of shuffling around in there and thinking about where we might like meet them and leave them.
Thank you. And that's a really good question as well. I read on a recent tweet that you don't see yourself as a natural performer, which came as a surprise to me, as you always, and this is absolutely true, you always come across as confident in your own work and your own voice. Where do you think this lack of confidence comes from? And can you share any tips for helping others to deal with it, to deal with stage shyness, for want of a better term?
Yeah, I think it's something that's really important to talk about. Certainly since I started publishing, I think there's much more expectation that poets will be good performers. So when I first started, so when Black Country was first published, or even a little bit earlier than that, it's almost like there was a bit of a snobbery around being a good performer, that somehow it meant you were kind of making up for some lack in the work. But I feel things have changed so much in loads of ways for the better. But there is a big expectation that you will perform your work and be a really good performer. But most poets, including me, perhaps aren't natural performers. I don't think of myself as extroverted. I get incredibly anxious. I suffer with terrible stage fright. When I used to do readings, when sometimes like I couldn't really eat the day before the reading because I'd be just so sort of, I'd have panic attacks during readings. And the thing that's helped me to get through it, somebody said to me, and I can't remember where it came from, they said to me, like, you've got to just trust the poems, like you've got to slip back under the skin of the poem, so you're feeling what you felt when you were writing it, and in that sense the poem will look after you, because you lose the self-consciousness of thinking, oh God, I'm on stage and everyone's looking at me and I'm gonna have to run off. Because you're just thinking about the poem, you're lost in the world of the poem. But and so I've sort of done my best to kind of handle the nerves that way over the years, just by sort of losing myself in the poems. And I wonder if that's what makes the performances feel sort of more involved or captivating, because it's almost like I cope with the nerves by absenting myself from it and just slipping back in the poem. But I think it's really important for poets to talk about, because lots of poets are naturally maybe a bit quieter or more gentle. And so it can be quite a hard part of the job for people.
I think that's so true. And I'm a really shy person myself. I don't take to performance very easily. They get very, very anxious, get terrible stage fright, terrible social anxiety as well. Get the same when I'm teaching as well. If I have to get in front of people, it's sort of what I do as a job, so it's unavoidable. So that's really interesting. I think this idea of distancing yourself from the poem as well is just really interesting. And you do, I mean, you do feel like when you read, you're going into that poem, and it transfers to the reader because they feel like they're going into the poem as well. It's just beautiful. I'm going to ask you again to do some more poems now, if that's all right.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you.
So I'll read 3 poems. So Eliza's sent out to Nova Scotia, to Cape Breton, and she's placed with an elderly couple, the MacPhails. And they're neither sort of kind or unkind to her, really. So in that sense, I suppose she's quite lucky. But it's a really lonely first winter. And one of the only things that sort of alleviates the loneliness of that sort of incredibly rural life and the domestic work are the creatures that are on the farm, particularly this little black foal that appears a lot. And something that really moved me in my research was that time and time again in their letters and interviews, the home children spoke about being made to feel like animals in their lives as young migrants. So I tried to thread that all the way through the book. The children are their fowls, their sparrows, their moths, their little creatures, their sort of violets, flowers, grass. And I wanted to bring with it this almost redemptive idea that perhaps the more than human is sort of the best of us, the best and noblest. So to be in its company is an honour rather than sort of a stain upon your character. So here we see Eliza with the little foal in that lonely winter. Darling foal. She was lonely, little foal. And the loneliness was so deep. A field chest high of snow she stumbled through, shivering. A night without stars or moon. It was so deep, little foal, that she would never know the bottom. It was so deep inside her. When she stroked you and kissed you, her bony fingers lifting the rough hairs of your mane, she was lost in that meadow, snowblind, fumbling, but holding your skittery body to her chest. She held her foul heart, its dark blessing a burn in spite the blizzard. So I was lucky enough when I was writing the book to go away on a residential, teaching a residential with loads of 12-year-old girls, which was perfect to sort of be around their fizz and energy and spirit. And I felt like we had a lot of really in-depth chats about horses. So I feel that like that horse foal energy is transferred through into Eliza. Oh, and this next poem. So after the sort of lonely first winter, the MacPhails take on another home child. They take a boy this time to help with the manual work at the farm. And so Daniel arrives, and he's a tiny bit older than Eliza, but the two become close. And in this poem, In the Pines, it's the first time they meet outside the farm and outside the watchful eye of the MacPhails. And it's also it follows a really, it's followed by a really important moment in which Eliza tells them her real name, because when she arrives at the MacPhails, they change her name really quickly, from Eliza to Lizzie. In the Pines. Meet me in the pines, he says. And so I go. In the pink sky of dawn, wench's sky, the night lifting like a morning veil, the dew trembling on the ferns, so quiet, no one knowing, even the animals still snuffling in their straw. My boots and sodden, my heart hummering in my chest, I can smell the pines all sweet, the quarry. And he's there, smiling, teeth like baby teeth, his eyes lit up. You came, he says. I nod, pines shushing me quiet. Feel this, he says, touching a leaf to my fingers. They call it a lamb's ear. And it's soft, so soft, that when I fold it in my palm, the tears come like rain. The rain that falls on Lammas Day shall cure even the sorest eyes made raw by weeping. Evening chores done, sitting on the back step. The rain's so soft, you hardly know your soul. Lizzie isn't my real name. Oh, that's what they call me here, but my real name was Eliza. Oh, he says it. Says it so soft, mizzle kissing my eyelids. And I'll finish with this little poem called Our Sweethearts. So the two do become sweethearts. And here's the moment when it happens. It's sort of down by the little stream, sitting side by side. And when I was writing this, I was just, I suppose, thinking of how sort of innocent and naive they would be. And this moment's based on a beautiful interview I'd read with some home children that had been in a residential school together and had been saying that they were so sort of desperate for love and companionship that they would go down to the stream together and sit next to each other and hold hands. But really, they had absolutely no idea what to do next. Oh, sweethearts. And slowly, in sweethearts, between the wet grass all rivulet, lime dust in our hair, and both of us so frightened, blind as moles, but wanting something, wanting. When side by side on the grass, my bare feet in the water, bowing our heads, gentle as Ossies at the water trough. I can feel his shoulders a shiver, and it makes me bold, makes me jumpy. So I hold out my arm till he takes it and kisses the palm like he's eating sugar from it, and we're off.
Thank you so much. Do you know, I've used that poem in workshops before, and it's just such a joy to hear you read it. It's just lovely. Got a few more questions for you. And do remember, everybody, if you want to ask a question, do put it in the chat. This is your chance to ask. I'm going to return to one of the questions that was on the website. The home child feels like an attempt to right the wrongs of historical forced immigration, or at least acknowledge those historical wrongs. At the same time, it doesn't feel like any sort of political statement on the rights and wrongs of child immigration. It feels very much like a personal story. What were your intentions when you set out to write the book? Did you find this aspect challenging?
Such an interesting question to be asked, because I think, as I said, I had no real specific intention when I set out. I was just really moved by the story and really haunted by the story. And I knew I wanted to write about it in some way, kind of honour Eliza's life. I think sometimes when we hear really sad stories about people or about people in the past, it becomes really flat to us, like it can feel very flat or 2D. So I wanted to bring back the sort of the humanity or the energy or the fizz of that. And I also knew that I didn't want to write a story that just was a really sad story. So I consciously trained myself to sort of look for like lightness or love or joyful moments or tender moments to make it feel like a sort of a fuller experience for the reader as well. But one thing I did do was I put in a really factual introduction. So in a way, I wanted to hand the reader all the facts. And sometimes I say this to poets. I was really inspired by other collections I'd read that are about perhaps a time in history or about an incident or or something that happened. I was thinking of J. Bernard's Surge, in which you get this really excellent, detailed, factual introduction, and then they just step out, and then the poems can get on with doing what they want to do. And so that was a way to get all that information in about this is what happened, these are the hound children, blah, 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 blah. And now I can step back and you can just enjoy the story. So really, I'd like people to make their own mind up, but it's been so interesting doing all the readings for the book. Honestly, it's just been a joy. But interesting to hear different perspectives. And the question comes up a lot, and it feels such a pertinent question of, can we judge the past by the standards of today? That's a question that has just got so many sort of threads running out from it, like a big web. But also the question of, what are we still doing today that we shouldn't be doing? What haven't we learned? And so it's been really interesting sort of talking about those things with people.
Was Eliza's story talked about in your own family? Was it part of your family narrative, or was she sort of hidden in your family?
Yeah, very much hidden, Wendy. So we always knew that my nanny had an auntie that emigrated to Canada. But the way it was told, we imagined that she'd been a grown-up woman, and this word emigrated, how different it feels to be an emigrant than to be an immigrant. But actually the only difference is you're an emigrant when you leave and you're an immigrant when you arrive. That's sort of the only definition difference. So I always imagined she was this sort of grown-up lady with a hat on a ship. And I understand why that narrative got passed down. I suppose there'd be so much shame, like amongst her brothers and amongst the family, and all the time when I was reading and researching the book, I thought two things. I thought, oh my God, like the crushingness of poverty, how it takes away people's choices, it takes away sort of people's like ability to keep their family together. And all the time I thought as well, even though you know, I know it's full of problems at the moment, thank God for the welfare state, because these things happen because there was no net. Like people's lives fell apart and there was no one, there was nothing except the workhouse to pick people up. So people had no choices. And it sort of made me sort of think really furiously, actually, these are things we've got to look after. We've got to, you know, we've got to fight for these things.
That is so true. It's so true. And again, this passion around it really shines through just in your work and in the way that you talk about it as well. Thank you for that. When you were doing your research around Eliza, did you find anything that was actually written by her or in her voice?
No, so it's interesting. And I sort of thought this, I was like, gosh, like most poor people, working class people, almost nothing remains of her life. There's almost no traces. And in a sense, we've actually got more than maybe you would have of other people, because you've got all her children's home records. So there's almost nothing. Like, she appears on census records, and I became kind of plagued by this question of could she read and write? And then just feeling sort of utter relief when I saw a census record when she must have been in her 20s, and you had to tick the box, Suzanne kept writing, were you literate? And that box had been ticked. But almost nothing exists. We've got letters from her brother that were kept in the children's home files, but almost nothing else. We've got these two photos, one of her when she's young, that's in the back of the book, and one when she's an old lady, little tiny old lady standing outside the church in Cape Breton. And in a way that was the challenge, because it was like, how can I make a life out of literally these scraps of information? But on the other hand, I suppose that's what imagination's for, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that the role of the poet is to tell these stories?
No. I don't think I can ever get behind statements that like the role of the poet is to do this or the role of the poet is to do that. I just think do what you want to do in your poems. Like if you want to just write quiet, gentle poems about, I'm just looking at beautiful blossom tree out my window. If you want to write quiet, beautiful poems about blossom, do that. Like if you want to write funny poems, rude poems, sexy poems, really political poems, do it. I think there's such a lot of pressure on poets to write a certain way. You have to write these poems that must feel timely and urgent and address things. But actually, yeah, write what you want to write.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just reading this comment in the chat, which is absolutely lovely, really nice. I'm going to leave you with one last question, and that is, what are you working on next? What can we expect from Liz Berry in the future?
Oh, Wendy, I wish I was like so brilliantly organised. Like I've never ever had a plan or got a plan. Like I always just work poem to poem, and I always have a really long break when I finished one thing, and then I just sort of fumble my way into the next. So I've only just started doing a little bit of writing again now, and I try and write just in my notebook, and I write for pleasure, and sometimes I go to other people's workshops or do write-alongs with people just to get back into it. Because I think you always finish a book and you think, oh, what am I going to say now? Like, I've got no idea what I want to write. So I just sort of feel my way back in. Someone I got asked in an interview the day to sort of describe my sort of writing process. And then probably can't see, but I just described it as like with my eyes shut, just sort of fumbling around in the dark. And that's what it feels like to me. I'm sort of reaching out and just blindly seeing what's there.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm just going to read this little comment out because it's so nice. It's from Sarah Passingham, and she says, when I first read the book, I was left feeling you had made these poems from a position of love for your great aunt, but also for the desperately young children that went with her. It was such a lottery who went and who stayed, but you've chosen to give them a voice, even quoted their names, and I find that profoundly moving. Absolutely nail on the head. I've recommended The Home Child to almost every book reader I meet. Thank you also for making a book that might convince prose readers that they can love poetry too. Ooh, that's a big job, isn't it?
Sarah, what a lovely comment. But I feel that's something that I really wanted to do. I think I'm always thinking when I'm writing and making a book, how can I bring people in? And we had that question, didn't we, on the Substack of why do you call it a novel in verse? And it's like, I love the thought of someone like my mum, who not especially into poetry, but loves reading. I love the thought of her being in the library and thinking, oh, do you know, I don't much read poetry, but like it begins with the word novel. So I feel like I get behind that. I'm interested, or I like books about history, or I like historical fiction. I love the thought of like slipping people in, saying, come on, it's for you as well. It's for everyone that wants to come.
Thank you so much. And we are at the end of the evening now, the end of the event, and I just want to say thank you so much, Liz, for being so generous with your time and with your reading and coming along and talking to us now. It's just been an absolute joy to listen to you. Thank you so much. You can all unmute yourselves now to give Liz a round of applause if you want.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you.
Oh, I love the Zoom clap. It always makes me laugh. So when I think, oh, I wish we were all in a room together. We could have a little chat afterwards and a cup of tea.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to let you go now. I'm going to let everyone go to enjoy your Friday evenings. And I will email you as well, Liz, after this. So thank you again for coming along. And thank you all for coming along. Our next book, by the way, for May is Tanya Shadrick's The Cure for Sleep. I nearly said The Cure for Sheep. The Cure for Sleep, and it is absolutely phenomenal. Oh my God, Wendy, time to call it an hand. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope to see you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.